All right, in this video, we're going to find trig functions given a couple of features. So certain things you'll want to note, and that is that we are basically dealing with sinusoids. So we're looking for functions of the form a sine b x minus c plus d, or okay, so I've defined these in other videos. I've defined what a midline is, the period, etc. So let's just use this as a way of finding an equation, assuming we know these things, and I'll try to weave through some of the concepts as best I can. So it says we want to find a sine function that has a midline of 4 and a period of 3/7. So let's first deal with the midline. The midline is the line that goes right through the middle of the graph. So this is a sinusoid. The midline is this horizontal line, and it's always y equals, in this case, d, because it's a vertical shift of the graph. Sine and cosine graphs normally have a midline of 0, y equals 0. I mean, I say normally, I mean with no shifts performed. So if we know the midline is 4, that tells us that d is 4. So now let's focus on the period. The period is the length of one cycle. So what that tells us is, in this case, for instance, if I use this, we'll just use this visual here. If I know that this distance here, that's clearly one cycle, that's the period. The period is 3/7. Okay. What that tells us is that it gives us the information about a horizontal compression or stretch of our graph. The value in this equation over here that tells us those things is the b value. Okay, so in another video, hopefully you've learned that the period is equal to 2 pi over b, technically the absolute value of b, but we'll just ignore that for now. So that means that 3/7 is equal to 2 pi over b, and I'll get my b value by cross multiplying. 3b equals 14 pi, and that means that b is equal to 14 pi over 3. And because that's all we're given, we can just freely choose our A and our C and our D. So I'm going to let C be 0. I'm going to have A be just 1, I guess. And I think I'm going to make, I think I might have said that we have a choice on D. Obviously we don't. D is 4. But let's just write as a sine graph. F of x equals, let A equal 1. So let C equal 0. So it's going to be 1 sine, our b value is 14 pi over 3. X minus c, it's x minus 0, so we can just write x. And our d value is, we learned, a 4. So that's one option. Any option using sine or cosine with this b value and d value will be fine. You can do a shift or change the amplitude, but this one will work. Here we're asked to find a cosine function that has a midline of 6, an amplitude of 3, and a frequency of 1/9. So again, our midline is 6. That tells us that our d value is 6 for the reasons I stated above. Amplitude is being a 3. The amplitude is this distance here. Okay, and that is our a. That is the amplitude is always the absolute value of our a value. Okay, but we might as well say that our a value is a 3 unless we're interested in a flip or anything by making a negative. Let's just make our lives easy and call it 3. And the frequency is 1/9. So if the frequency is 1/9, we can get the period. Okay, that means it does one cycle every interval of 9. So the reason we can use that to get the period, and again, if I haven't done this in a different video, you'll see it here. It does one cycle every time you go an interval of 9. So so here, let's just start this graph at 0. It does one cycle every time you go an interval of 9. So that would look like this. It's supposed to be a cosine graph, but let's ignore that for the moment. Focus on the general principle. So that's a distance of 9. It does one cycle every time you go 9, which means that the period is clearly 9 because it's doing the period is the length of one cycle. It's clearly 9. Just to point out, if let's say the frequency was 2/9, so that would mean it does 2 cycles every time you go an interval of 9. We would have drawn this. So 1 cycle, 2 cycles, that's 9. It did 2 cycles, which means that the period is here, right? Period's the length of one cycle. That's 9/2. So again, I'm trying to draw your attention to the fact that the period is the reciprocal. The period is the reciprocal of the frequency. So in any case, yeah, that formula would work up here too. Frequency is a 9th, period would be 9. But that's also 2 pi over our b value, and that tells us that our b value is 2 pi over 9. And so now we've got everything we need. We've got our D, our A, our B, C we have free choice for, and according to the directions I want to make this a cosine graph. So we're going to write that this is g of x equals A is 3, cosine, our B value is 2 pi over 9. Let's make C 0, so no shift, and our D is a 6. That equation would satisfy these conditions above. And of course, it's not the only answer. These aren't the only two answers, but they work. And hopefully this gives you some insight into how you can think about these problems.